Let me start with a moment that's probably way too familiar. It's late. Your phone is face down on the bed. You told yourself today was the day you'd finally start that thing, the project, the habit, the application, the workout, the edit, the study session. And now you're lying there thinking, I'll do it tomorrow. I just need one clean day. But tomorrow keeps ghosting you. And here's the part nobody says out loud. It doesn't feel like laziness. It feels heavy, foggy, like your brain is wading through syrup. You're not avoiding the task. You're avoiding the version of yourself that shows up when you try. That subtle disappointment. That, what if I fail again? That quiet fear that maybe this time will prove something you don't want proven. So you scroll. You snack. You reorganize your desk for the 4th time. You promise yourself you'll really lock in after this one last thing. And then the day ends. Again. Now here's the gut punch. Procrastination doesn't usually start with a big decision. It starts with something microscopic. A thought so small you don't even register it as a choice. And that's where the butterfly effect comes in. The lie we're taught about procrastination. Most advice treats procrastination like a motivation problem. Just start. Use discipline. Break it into chunks. Try the Pomodoro technique. And look, those aren't useless, but they don't touch the root. Because if procrastination were just about time management, you wouldn't procrastinate on the things you care about most. You don't procrastinate because you don't want the outcome. You procrastinate because of what the outcome might say about you. And that fear doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in quietly, like a butterfly flapping its wings. The first core concept, micro-avoidance. Here's the concept that changes everything. Procrastination is not one big act of avoidance. It's a chain reaction of tiny avoidances that feel harmless in the moment. Micro-avoidance. That's the real enemy. It's when you check a notification before opening the document. Tell yourself you'll just plan instead of actually doing. Decide to wait until you feel ready. Open the task, then immediately switch tabs. None of these feel like procrastination. They feel reasonable, responsible, even productive. But they're not neutral. Each one subtly teaches your brain the same lesson. Avoidance equals relief. And your brain loves relief. A quick story, probably yours too. Let me tell you about someone I worked with. I'll call him Jay. Jay wanted to start a YouTube channel, not casually. He really wanted this. He watched videos, took notes, bought a mic, spent hours researching thumbnails, titles, niches. But every time it came to actually hitting record, nothing. He'd clean his room, update his Notion board, rewrite his content plan. Weeks passed. When we finally broke it down, the issue wasn't fear of failure. It was something sneakier. The moment Jay opened his camera app, a thought flashed, barely conscious. If I record this and it sucks, then maybe I'm not who I think I am. That thought lasted less than a second, but his brain remembered the feeling. So next time, it nudged him towards safety. Let's research more. Let's wait until we're better prepared. Tiny wing flaps, massive storm. What's actually happening in your brain? Let's talk psychology. Plain English, no jargon. Your brain has one primary job. Keep you safe. Not successful, not fulfilled. Safe. And your brain defines safe very broadly. Physical danger? Sure. But also social rejection, failure, identity threat, feeling stupid, feeling behind. When you approach a task that matters, your brain doesn't see opportunity, it sees risk. So it runs a quick cost-benefit analysis. Option A, do the task, possible discomfort, failure, self-judgment. Option B, avoid, immediate relief. Guess which one wins in the short term? Every single time. And here's the brutal part. Your brain doesn't understand future regret. It understands present relief. So each micro-avoidance, every tab switch, every "I'll do it later" reinforces a loop. Approach task, feel discomfort. Avoid, feel relief. Brain learns, avoidance works. That's operant conditioning. You're training yourself without realizing it. The butterfly effect explained simply. In chaos theory, the butterfly effect means a tiny input can radically change an outcome. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil. Weeks later, there's a hurricane elsewhere. In procrastination, the butterfly isn't a big decision. It's this moment. The first time you almost start and then don't. That's the wing flap. Because from that point on, your brain starts predicting, last time we avoided this, we felt better. Let's do that again. The second avoidance becomes easier. The third becomes automatic. The 10th doesn't even register. And months later, you're not just procrastinating, you're stuck. Not because you're broken, because your brain is doing exactly what you trained it to do. Pause for a second. This part matters. I want you to think about one thing you've been putting off. Not 10 things, one. Now ask yourself, honestly, when was the first moment I delayed it? What tiny choice did I make that felt harmless at the time? Not the big delay, the first one. That's where the storm started. Why just start feels impossible. This is why advice like just start feels insulting. Because you're not fighting the task, you're fighting a learned emotional reflex. Your nervous system associates the task with threat. Your body reacts before logic gets a vote. That's why you can want to start and still feel frozen. And here's the twist most people miss. The longer you wait, the more emotional weight the task accumulates. Now it's not just, I need to do this. It's, I should have done this already. What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? So the task grows teeth, and the butterfly becomes a monster.
You don't beat procrastination by doing more. You beat it by changing what your brain learns in the first 30 seconds of contact with a task. That's it. That's the lever. Because once the loop starts spinning, logic is basically locked out of the room. Why motivation never shows up first? Let me ask you something real quick. Have you ever noticed that motivation almost never comes before action? You don't feel motivated to shower, you shower, then you feel better. You don't feel motivated to clean, you wipe one surface, then momentum appears. You don't feel motivated to work, you open the file, then your brain warms up. So why do we keep waiting for motivation like it's a bus that's late? Because waiting feels safe, but safety is the trap. The second core concept, reverse the relief. Remember earlier when we talked about micro-avoidance creating relief? Here's the counterintuitive move. You don't remove procrastination by making work feel good. You remove it by making avoidance feel incomplete. Not painful, not shame-filled, just unfinished. This is where most people mess up. They think the goal is to push themselves into full focus, deep work, flow state. Nope. That's like trying to run a marathon when your leg is asleep. Your real job is much smaller. Your job is to interrupt the relief cycle. A tiny story that changes everything. There was a grad student I worked with, Maya, extremely smart, also chronically stuck. Every day she'd tell herself, I'll work after dinner. Every night she'd feel exhausted and guilty. Classic loop. So we made one rule. Not study for 2 hours, not finish the chapter. The rule was this. Open the document, write one bad sentence, stop. That's it. The first night she laughed. This feels stupid. But she did it, and something weird happened. She didn't feel motivated, but she also didn't feel relieved when she stopped. The relief wasn't clean. Her brain was like, wait, we touched the thing. Why do I still feel engaged? That friction matters. The neuroscience behind this, no fancy words. When you avoid a task, your brain releases dopamine, not because you're happy, but because you escaped discomfort. Relief dopamine. But when you take a tiny, non-threatening action, something different happens. Your brain updates its prediction. This task didn't hurt me. That's massive. Your nervous system doesn't care about your to-do list. It cares about prediction errors. If it expects pain and gets neutrality instead, it has to recalibrate. That's learning. Why small wins are often explained wrong. You've probably heard the phrase small wins, but most people interpret it as do small tasks to feel accomplished. That's not the point. The point is identity-safe exposure. You're teaching your brain, I can approach this without dying socially, emotionally, or psychologically. Not I finished, but I survived contact. That's the win. The 90-second rule that changes everything. Here's something wild from effective neuroscience. Most emotional responses peak and fade within 90 seconds if you don't feed them with thought. Fear, resistance, dread. They spike, then settle. But procrastination feeds them by escaping immediately. So here's the move. Stay with the task for 90 seconds. No expectations, no performance goals, just presence. Open the file. Stare at the page. Type nonsense if you need to. You're not trying to do the work. You're letting the emotional wave pass. Most people quit at second 20. That's when the butterfly flaps. Let's interrupt the pattern right now. Think about the last time you procrastinated. Be honest. What was the very first feeling? Not the excuse, not the thought, the feeling. Was it tightness in the chest? Pressure behind the eyes? A subtle urge to escape? That's your nervous system, not your character. And nervous systems don't respond to lectures. They respond to experience. Why planning can be a form of avoidance. This one stings. Planning feels productive. Research feels productive. Watching how to be productive videos feels productive. But ask yourself, does this action move me closer to contact with the task or further away? If it delays contact, it's avoidance with a fancy hat. Your brain doesn't care how aesthetic your Notion dashboard is. It cares whether you touched the thing. The lower the bar until it's embarrassing technique. Here's something that works way better than it should. Lower the bar so much that your ego doesn't feel threatened. Not, I'll write 500 words, but I'll write the title. I'll open the document. I'll write one sentence and close it. Your pride will hate this. That's how you know it's working. Because pride is often the thing protecting you from failure. And protection is procrastination's best friend. A quick reality check. If you've been telling yourself, I just need to fix my discipline, I need more willpower, I need to stop being lazy, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't lack discipline. You lack emotional safety around starting. That's not a moral issue. It's a nervous system issue. And nervous systems are trainable. Where this gets dangerous, in a good way. Once your brain learns that starting doesn't hurt, something flips. The task loses its emotional charge, the story loses its power, the monster shrinks, and suddenly procrastination feels boring. That's when momentum shows up, quietly. Not as hype, not as motivation porn, as neutrality. And neutrality is freedom.
Let's clear something up right away. If you're watching this and thinking, why do I understand all of this but still struggle? That's not a contradiction. That's the clue. The smarter you are, the more dangerous starting feels. Here's a pattern I see over and over. The people who procrastinate the hardest are often self-aware, introspective, high standards, capable of deep thinking, used to being the smart one, which sounds backwards until you look at what's really happening. When you're smart, effort isn't just effort. Effort becomes evidence. Evidence about your intelligence, your potential, your worth, your future. So starting a task isn't neutral. It's a test, and failing a test feels like a verdict. The third core concept, procrastination as identity protection. Here it is, clean and uncomfortable. Procrastination often protects your identity more than your comfort. If you never fully try, you never fully fail. If you delay, the story stays intact.
I could have done better if I started earlier. I'd be great at this if I really tried. I have potential, I just didn't apply it. That story hurts, but it hurts less than proving it wrong. So procrastination becomes a shield, a painful one, but a familiar one. A story you might recognize too well. There was a guy I worked with, Daniel. Top of his class growing up, teachers praised him constantly. Then adulthood hit. Suddenly, things required sustained effort, not just talent. Daniel would wait until the last possible moment to do anything. Deadlines, applications, creative work. From the outside, it looked like self-sabotage. From the inside, it was self-preservation. Because if he waited until the last minute and failed, he could say, well, of course it wasn't my best, I didn't have time. But if he gave it his full effort, there'd be no buffer, no excuse, just him and the result. That's terrifying. The psychology of shame. Why this gets sticky. Shame isn't, I did something bad. Shame is, something is bad about me. And procrastination is soaked in it. Every delay whispers, what kind of person can't even start? Why is this so hard for me? Other people don't struggle like this. So you avoid the task to avoid the shame, which creates more shame. That's the loop. And shame kills action. Not because you're weak, but because shame collapses your sense of possibility. Why self-criticism makes it worse, even if it feels motivating. A lot of people try to beat procrastination by being harsher with themselves. Stop being lazy. Get it together. What's wrong with you? Sometimes that works, briefly. But here's what your brain hears. This task is dangerous. Failure means self-attack. So next time, more avoidance, more resistance, more freeze. Self-criticism doesn't create discipline. It creates fear conditioning. The hidden reason you might be afraid to finish. This one's subtle. Sometimes you don't procrastinate because you're afraid to fail. You procrastinate because you're afraid to succeed. Because success changes expectations. If you do well once, now you have to maintain it, repeat it, live up to it. Staying stuck feels safer than being seen. So you hover in almost land, not failing, not succeeding, just suspend it. Let's pause and get uncomfortably honest. I want you to ask yourself something, no judgment. What identity does procrastination protect for you? Is it the gifted one who hasn't peaked yet? The creative who works under pressure? The potential that hasn't been fully tested? Because as long as procrastination serves that identity, it will resist change, not consciously, automatically. The reframe that loosens the grip. Here's a shift that helps more than any productivity hack. Treat your work as information, not evaluation. Not, this proves who I am, but this shows me where I am right now. Big difference. When work becomes data, failure becomes feedback. And feedback isn't personal, it's directional. A simple practice that reduces identity threat. Next time you start something, say this, literally or mentally. This is a draft. This is data. This is allowed to be bad. You're not lowering standards, you're postponing judgment, and that creates psychological safety. Safety is what unlocks action. Why you feel blocked when you're actually afraid. A lot of people say, I feel blocked, I feel stuck, I feel frozen. But what they often mean is, I feel exposed. Exposure without safety equals shutdown. So instead of asking, how do I force myself to work, ask, how do I make this feel less like a referendum on my worth? That question changes everything. Where this leaves us. By now, you should see something clearly. Procrastination isn't about time. It's about threat, and specifically identity threat. You're not lazy, you're protecting something fragile. And the irony is, that thing doesn't need protection. It needs room to breathe. Here's the quiet realization most people never reach. You don't overcome procrastination by becoming a different person. You overcome it by building a system that no longer requires you to be brave every day. Because willpower is a terrible long-term strategy, and courage is expensive. The final core concept, trust, is built through predictability, not intensity. Most people think self-trust comes from big wins. It doesn't. Self-trust comes from this very boring equation. When I say I'll do something small, I actually do it. That's it. Not once, not heroically, but consistently. Your brain doesn't trust your intentions, it trusts your track record. And procrastination thrives when that trust is broken. Why you don't believe yourself anymore? Let's be honest for a second. If you've struggled with procrastination for years, there's probably a quiet voice in your head that says, "Yeah, sure you'll do it this time." And that voice isn't mean, it's learned. Every time you promised tomorrow and didn't follow through, your brain took notes, not to punish you, to predict you. So now, when you plan something ambitious, your nervous system doesn't mobilize, it braces. The shift that changes everything. Here's the reframe that actually sticks. Stop trying to prove you're capable. Start proving you're reliable. Capable is vague. Reliable is concrete. Reliable looks like, I open the file every weekday at 9. I write one sentence even if it's trash. I stop when I said I would. That last one matters more than you think. Why overworking destroys self-trust. This is counterintuitive but crucial. When you push past your limits, you're not building discipline, you're teaching your brain that starting equals suffering. So next time, more resistance, more delay, more avoidance. Stopping on time tells your nervous system, this is safe. We can do this again. That's how habits survive. The butterfly effect reversed. Let's zoom out. At the beginning, procrastination started with a tiny choice. I'll do it later. Now we flip it. The new butterfly flap looks like, I'll touch it briefly and stop. That's it. Small action, no drama, no identity threat. Over time, this creates a different storm. Less fear, less friction, more neutrality, more momentum. Not overnight, but inevitably. The environment matters more than motivation. One more hard truth. If your environment makes avoidance easy, you'll avoid, no matter how insightful you are. So, ask yourself, where do I usually procrastinate? What distractions are always within arm's reach? What does my space invite me to do? You don't need a perfect setup, you need fewer escape hatches. Phone in another room, one tab open, one clear starting point. Reduce choices, reduce friction, reduce drama. The default start rule. This is one of the most effective systems I know. Pick a default start, not a goal, not an outcome, a start. For example, open the document at 8:30. Sit at the desk after coffee. Write for 5 minutes, timer on. No decision, no negotiation, no mood check. Defaults remove the question, should I start? Because that question is where procrastination lives. What to do on bad days? This matters. You will still have bad days. Days where your brain is loud, your energy is low, your confidence is gone. Here's the rule for those days. Do the smallest version of the habit and stop. Not to keep the streak alive, but to keep the relationship intact. You're saying, I didn't disappear on myself. That matters more than output. Let's talk about self-forgiveness, not the cringy kind. Forgiveness isn't saying, it's okay that I procrastinated. It's saying, I understand why I did and I'm adjusting the system. No shame, no spiraling, no self-attack. Just information. That's how adults move forward. The long game nobody talks about. Over time, something subtle happens. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop overthinking starting. You stop making the task bigger than it is. Not because you're tougher, but because your nervous system is calmer. And calm beats motivation every time. One last reflection. Sit with this. Think about the thing you've been avoiding. Not the biggest version, the smallest entry point. Ask yourself, what is the tiniest action that would restore a bit of trust with myself today? Do that. Then stop. That's enough.
Procrastination didn't ruin your life. It protected you when you didn't know another way. Now you do. Not with force, not with shame, not with hustle. With small, honest actions that compound quietly. That's the real butterfly effect. And it starts the next time you open the thing. Not to conquer it, but just to say, I'm here. And that's how it ends.